welcome to all our viewers and welcome to a new edition of Africa Today, our program bringing you all the latest news from the African continent. My name is Angie Meher and I'll be joining you for today's episode. As usual, we begin with a look at some of the news making the headlines, and we begin from Tunisia, where the political consultation mechanism meeting between Egypt and Tunisia kicks off on Tuesday. The mechanism, in its 15th round, will be focusing on bilateral relations, in addition to several regional and international files of mutual concern. This time moving to Chad, where Cairo stressed that Sudan's neighbors need to speak in a unified voice to convince the parties in the armed conflict to end it in the country, to end its hostilities. The statement was made during the Chad meeting over Sudan, which brought together representatives from Sudan's neighboring countries. We have more details in this report.
Foreign ministers from Sudan's neighboring countries in their first ministerial meeting in Chad on Monday discussed strategies for addressing the ongoing Sudanese crisis. Shukri's statement came during the first ministerial level mechanism meeting of Sudan's neighbors that was hosted by Chad in its capital N'Djamena on Monday and attended by ministers from Libya, Central Africa, South Sudan, Ethiopia and Eritrea. He said there is need to speak with a unified voice to convince the two parties in the Sudanese conflict to cease hostilities. He also said the neighboring countries' leaders expect proposals for immediate measures to respond to a crushing humanitarian crisis in the country. The mechanism, which aims to find a comprehensive solution to end the armed conflict in Sudan, was formed at the Sudan Neighboring Countries Summit that was hosted by Egypt on 13th of July. Shukri also underscored the dire situation faced by millions of citizens of Sudan. He said the scale of human suffering is increasing every day amid an unprecedented shortage of food, medicine and the basics of life. He cautioned against the complete uncertainty which characterizes the current political process in the country. Shukri stressed that the Sudanese people were never a party to the start of this war, and they all are looking to the initiative of their neighbors to end it.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We're now delighted to be joined over the telephone by His Excellency Ambassador Mohammed El Ashmawi, the former Assistant Foreign Minister. It's a very good afternoon to you, Mr. Ambassador. Good afternoon, Mr. Ambassador. Can you hear us?
Yes.
Thank you very much for joining us, Your Excellency.
Thank you. Thank you for the call.
Thank you. Mr. Ambassador, let's talk about the latest meetings regarding Sudan that were held in Chad. How do you see the conflict in Sudan affecting Sudan's neighboring countries, which were very keen to attend the meeting in Chad in order to discuss possible solutions to the crisis?
It is really connected to the national security of all the countries
Yes.
Around Sudan. And Egypt, also national interest, the national security of Egypt is very much affected by the problem there.
Yes. Your Excellency, how do you weigh the outcome of the meeting? How do you see some of the statements that came out of the meeting in Chad?
Well, it's very important for the foreign ministers to meet and to see what's going on there. And they will put their point of view before the presidents of the countries, the presidents of the countries around Sudan.
Indeed. Now, during the meeting, Cairo said there is a need to speak with a unified voice to convince the two parties in the Sudanese conflict to cease hostilities, especially for the sake of the Sudanese civilians. How do you read this statement, sir?
Well, it's very important, really, and I mean, there should be the countries should have their point of view. Their point of view should be presented to the presidents of these countries. And to see how the problem is affecting all the countries around Sudan.
Indeed. What immediate measures do you see, Mr. Ambassador, are needed to respond to the crushing humanitarian crisis in the country, as proposed by Cairo, sir?
We are doing our best, really, to do something to help the humanitarian problems over there in Sudan. Egypt is really is putting all interests and all its ways how to respond to the humanitarian problems over there, and all the countries should do the same thing, because it's a matter of national security before everything.
Absolutely. And with the humanitarian situation in the country worsening, how do you see heavyweights, interfering to secure specifically the delivery of food and aid to the country?
We are doing our best to do something for that and to help the Sudanese people. To put an end to that problem and to make something for the national security of Sudan and the national security of all the countries around Sudan.
Absolutely. What, Your Excellency, do you expect the response of the warring parties in Sudan to be in the next few days?
Well, we hope they will respond in a good way, or to do something to put an end to the problem over there.
In your opinion, what are the worst repercussions could you expect if the situation in Sudan remains unsettled for much longer?
No, it's a big problem for the national security of all the countries. And in Egypt, it's a matter of national security for Egypt itself and for Africa and for all the neighboring countries.
Absolutely. And another problem facing, the neighboring countries is the influx of refugees and Sudanese people fleeing from the war in Sudan. How has this affected the neighboring countries in this regard?
It's very much affecting the neighboring countries, and we are doing our best to put an end to the problem over there, to stop these problems.
Absolutely right. Your Excellency, Ambassador Mohammed El Ashmawi, the former Assistant Foreign Minister, thank you very much, sir, for your time and your insight and for joining us on today's edition of Africa Today. And we continue still with more news coming your way, this time from Sudan itself. Residents of an area near the Sudanese capital were ordered to evacuate as fighting between the army and the paramilitary forces continues to shake the capital. We have more details in this story.
UN officials say fighting in Sudan has plunged 24 million into a humanitarian catastrophe. Witnesses also said heavy artillery fire fell on densely populated areas of the Sudanese capital and nearby areas. In adjacent Durman, Khartoum's battle-scarred twin city, shelling fell on residential homes. The army and paramilitary forces ordered the evacuation of civilians from Abu Ruf, according to the Neighborhood's Resistance Committee, one of the many groups that used to organize pro-democracy demonstrations and now provides assistance to families in the line of fire. The army conducted airstrikes and fired artillery at the Shambat bridge to cut off access to the area from their foes, the Rapid Support Forces RSF. The paramilitary group used the bridge to resupply from the other side of the Nile, as reported. The war between the Army Chief General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan and his former deputy RSF commander Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo has killed more than 3,900 people. It has displaced more than 3.3 million, according to the UN, and plunged millions more into hunger. Much of the country's already fragile infrastructure has been destroyed, with more than 80% of Sudan's hospitals no longer in service. The few health facilities that remain often come under fire or are looted and struggle to provide care.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Still following up on the situation in Sudan and the conflict there. We're delighted to be joined over the telephone by His Excellency, Mr. Ambassador Gamal Bayoumi, former Assistant Foreign Minister. It's a very good afternoon to you, Mr. Ambassador. Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador, for your time. And let me start by asking you, how do you see the recent meetings held over the Sudanese crisis in Chad, which were attended by the neighboring countries to Sudan?
Sudan is a very dear country to us. It's not a brother country. It was part of the whole country of the Egyptian Sudanese country. I am of the generation who saluted in the primary school and the secondary school and my first years in the university. We were saluting one flag covering Egypt and Sudan.
Yes.
Sudan decided in the 60s to separate itself from Egypt. Unfortunately, because of the problem which we do not aware about it as Egyptians. I am Egyptian, whether I am from Alexandria or Aswan. In Sudan and in Africa in general, the tribes are much more bringing the attention more than the country. That's why the same Sudan who separated itself from Egypt, it became two Sudans, North Sudan and South Sudan. Unfortunately, each Sudan of them, they have a civil war among their own citizens based on the difference between parties and tribes. Here we are trying to help our brothers in Sudan to realize that one country is in favor of every party, and the division will be a sort of burden on all the Sudanese, whether they are with the right or the left. Here comes the importance of this meeting in Chad, and Chad also is very important neighbor to Sudan, like Egypt. And I hope we can convince all the parties in Sudan in order to come to reason and to come to the only solution possible, which is democracy, to elect a government by the whole people of the country, and then we have one Sudan again in order to continue our political life.
Indeed. In the meeting in Chad, Cairo said, of course, there's a need to speak with a unified voice to convince the two parties to end hostilities, especially with the immediate measures needed to address the crushing humanitarian crisis in the country. How do you see the statement, Your Excellency?
Yes, absolutely. And I'm picking the situation which thousands and millions of Sudanese are suffering from. They need to move from their places because it is becoming a field of war. And we have already 4 million Sudanese living among us in Egypt. We do not consider them migrants or anything like that. Now we have plenty of them coming again. As a diplomat, I am receiving many requests from friends trying to ask for visa for a Sudanese coming from the Gulf or from Libya or wherever they are, and they cannot go back to their country. So Egypt has also the privilege that we know every party and every single leadership in Sudan, and I hope they listen to us and they listen to the wise advice from Egypt and other brother friends.
Right, absolutely. I'd like to thank you very, very much, Your Excellency, Mr. Ambassador Gamal Bayoumi, our former Assistant Foreign Minister. Thank you very much, sir, for your time and your insight and joining us on today's edition of Africa Today, and still bringing you news from the African continent, this time to Niger, where the coup leaders have refused to let senior U.S. diplomat meet with the deposed president. Testifying before a hearing on Capitol Hill in Washington, the acting Deputy Secretary of State Victoria Nuland said that they were quite firm about how they want to proceed. She spoke after a 2-hour meeting in Niger's capital with some leaders of the military takeover of the country. We have more details in this report.
A senior U.S. diplomat said coup leaders in Niger refused to allow her to meet Monday with the West African country's deposed president, whom she described as under virtual house arrest. Acting Deputy Secretary of State Victoria Nuland also described the mutinous officers as unrespectful of U.S. pressure to return the country to civilian rule. She characterized the conversation as extremely frank and at times quite difficult. She spoke after a 2-hour meeting in Niger's capital, Niamey, with some leaders of the military takeover of a country that has been a vital counter-terrorism partner of the U.S. She spoke after a 2-hour meeting in Niger's capital, Niamey, with some leaders of the military takeover of the country. In speaking to junta leaders, Nuland said she made absolutely clear the kinds of support the U.S. will legally have to cut off if democracy is not restored. If the U.S. determines that a democratically elected government has been toppled by unconstitutional means, federal law requires a cut-off of most American assistance, particularly military aid. The coup's top leader, former Presidential Guard head Abdurrahmani Chiani, did not meet with the Americans.
With this final news item, ladies and gentlemen, we wrap up today's edition of Africa Today. We do hope you have enjoyed it. You're in the company of myself, Angie Meher. Thank you for watching.